Hi everyone, my name is Abby Bangser, and I want to talk to you today about my experiences in helping to build the platform engineering maturity model released by the CNCF Platforms Working Group in late 2023. My experiences that led me here was being a platform engineer for many years, as well as being a co-lead of the CNCF Working Group and being a principal engineer at Centasso, where we're building a framework called Cradix that helps people build platforms. All of these led to this journey to help the industry come together behind an idea around defining maturity in a platform. But in many ways, this is a bit of a fool's errand. And I know that because just thinking about how to define maturity at the start of this talk was stressful and had me looking up dictionary definitions. But at the end of the day, reading one of those doesn't quite capture what maturity means to us as people in the industry. Maturity is a bit of a social construct. Maturity is something that defines a future state that we feel like we can always be growing towards and always be improving towards. We see it as a betterment of ourselves and a betterment of where we're headed. But what does maturity mean? What is better? It's that social construct where we need to be able to understand what is possible, to understand that there is growth to be had. And to a certain extent, if you haven't seen what's possible, you may have a limited view of what maturity could be for yourself, and therefore not realize the opportunities that you can grow into. And that's why before we ever had any conversations about maturity models and measuring maturity of platforms, the CNCF Platforms Working Group first focused on getting to be a shared language and creating documentation and writings that would help guide people into what is possible with platforms and platform engineering. And that was the first white paper that the Platforms Working Group put out, which was in early 2023. And it took into account a very high level, kind of C-level conversation around what platforms can do for an organization. The table of contents you can see here talks about really high level what and why behind platforms, but also does broaden out to talk about things like the team behind building platforms, how that can measure success in your organization, and why platforms may not always be an easy solution or even the right solution. We wanted to make sure to put platforms in a space where we could talk about it effectively. But once we had this, you can start to think of this as the definition of platforms. I mean, we had 50 collaborators on this. It took us almost a year to put out. This is a canonical definition in some ways. But context always trumps these definitions. So the context of your organization in regards to platform engineering is extremely important. And we realize that putting out a paper like this can make it seem like there's one right way. And that didn't feel right to the people in the group. It also meant that any other papers and documents that we wanted to write needed to make sure to soften that and make sure to include people of all different contexts in their organizations. So when we were talking about things, we started thinking, well, how can we help people grow into this view, even if they're not there yet, and determine what a part of this paper might or might not apply to them in their context. And one of the first things we ran into is the fact that growth isn't linear. We started having conversations about whether or not platform engineering needed to start from a top-down mentality of building a team first from leadership buy-in, or if it could bubble up from little actions being taken in different teams and by individual engineers. And what we realized is both can be successful, again, depending on your context. The other thing we realized is that we didn't want to start putting out more papers that reinforce that the platform's white paper defined the one true way to do platforms. Because while you can't be what you can't see, we also cannot limit innovation by making it seem like there's only one way to do things, and that if you can't see it, it's not possible. It's more like it may not be explored yet. So we wanted to make sure that in any other future writings, we continue to expand people's minds, have people really think deeply about their context and their needs and their growth patterns so they can continue to innovate in the space rather than feel trapped by our thinking in this relatively small group and in this current day. So I want to introduce to you now the actual model that we created, but I of course need to say that all models are wrong and some are useful. We have heard that this one's useful, and I'm going to share some stories from people about that. But I do want to call out that, again, the context matters and that this is a model and this is not a concrete thing to follow without applying your own thinking and context to it. So with that in mind, the first thing I want to call out is that the model asks readers to identify what enables, challenges, and measures their efforts as platform builders. So they need to start thinking about things like how platform is staffed and funded, things about how their users discover platform capabilities, whether or not people are able to consume and how they consume the platform, as well as how the platform grows and has an entire life cycle of managing updates, upgrades, deletes, that full life cycle management. And of course, this is something that needs to grow, so it needs to have feedback and learning incorporated in the process. These are the things we think that people who are building any piece of software need to think about, and that's true for platforms as well. But it's a lot of words, so we created aspect headlines. So investment, adoption, interface, operations, and measurement. This was one of the hardest things to do, was to come up with these individual words, but what we found is that as we narrowed in and agreed on those concepts in the kind of longer sentences, it became easier to come up with the single words. When we started with just the single words, it was too hard to make sure that we were all on the same page. So once we got to our single words, we had to think about how we were going to measure maturity. It's really easy to say levels 1 through 5 or 1 through 4. But what we didn't want to do is just give numbers. We wanted to build context in at the root of it. So we started to talk about the context of your organization. Your organization may require a provisional level of maturity. It only needs things that just work as is. May need to be operational, as in you're needing that sort of security and reliability. You also may need to be scalable. You may need to be scaling to support more users or more engineers or more traffic, things like that. And you may already be operational and scalable, and you just are looking for those optimizations along the way. And so you're in a continuously optimizing state. From there, we took the realization that platforms have been here for decades. There's a great talk about 20 years of platforms that you can see from Colin Humphreys here on PlatformCon, and I would recommend you check that out because platforms, I would argue, are in all of our organizations already. So we track the fact that that exists. We also tried to track what is happening in the white paper and what we're portraying as a really mature state for platforms in our understanding today. And then fill in the middle, and we fill in the roadmap in the middle. So here's the whole maturity model. You can look at that QR code to see more about it. There's a 12-page paper about it online that you can see more. And I really do recommend you go through that if this is something of interest to you, because it includes examples of organizations within our group describing how this was used and how this might show up in your context, in your organization. But with this model, we are seeing people actually already use it. And one of the powers behind the CNCF group is that it's a diverse group from different backgrounds. We have people, for example, that are in companies that are using platforms to drive bigger organizations that sell things like cars and bank accounts and t-shirts. And so we had one of the end users give a conversation around their growing engineering team and their need to manage that. And they used the maturity model in order to ask clarifying questions that gave them the ability to define the capabilities that mattered most to their organization. They were able to apply those levels to their own context. So what does provisional and operational and scalable mean in their context? And they were able to visualize on this map where they want to be and where they are today so they could have the hard conversations of where investment should go. And they could start to think strategic rather than just tactical on what happened to get asked for that given day. We also have vendors. There's many vendors such as I building products in that group. And one of the vendors gave a conversation around how they're building platforms and they're able to use this model to have a conversation about what they can help customers with. Where are customers today? Are they at a level they can take advantage of this vendor's tool or not? And where can this tool actually help them? Or would this tool not provide a huge boost forward for the challenges that they are currently trying to tackle on this maturity journey that they're under? The vendors also get a lot of benefit around making sure that they understand what these end user companies are actually interested in and doing. So I think that comes into play as well. The third type of participant in the CNCF working group is consultants. And we have a consultancy in the group who works on both sides of platforms, both building those platforms and using them within their customers. And they've used this to actually define their statements of work to make sure that the customers and they are aligned on where they're not going to invest and where they are. And so it provides confidence to customers that they're on the right path as well within the industry and that the consultants are leading them in the right direction. So what have I learned in being a part of this building of the maturity model? First of all, when you're doing things in a group of not-for-profit and volunteer people of such different backgrounds, it can feel like epic chaos trying to go in the same direction. But what I learned is that when we all expected best intentions from each other, we wound up in a lot better space because we dug into why we didn't understand why someone was saying something and how we could apply it. And this model looks wildly different from the first model that was written, and every model in between has taught us something, and we've grown because of the people involved. We also learned that we really cared about durability of certain concepts. We wanted to make sure that this was not something that was in the hype cycle today, but that could live through different techniques and tactics that are going to come up over the years. Yes, we will grow. Yes, we will learn, but we want to learn in larger strategic ways, not because a certain tool has disappeared. So you won't find any tools in this paper. In addition, we wanted to build in movement. So Nikki Watt gave a fantastic talk at the Platform Engineering Day in Europe. This QR code's a little bit broken off, but you can search for it. And she talks about how there's movement along this model. And I really recommend taking a look at how someone else has dove into that experience. Finally, one of the things that we really learned in writing this is that build versus buy is just the wrong abstraction. When you try and start asking, well, can we use this model if we buy our platform or if we build our platform? What we can answer truthfully is yes, you can use it in both cases. And in most cases, most organizations are doing a bit of both. And that's why this model is built around outcomes and not tools, because you should be able to get these outcomes whether you're building or buying. So what's next now that you've learned about this maturity model? Well, I highly recommend you join the working group. There's a lot to do on more deep dives on things like platform as a product. We're doing a lot of interviews of end user companies. We'd love to have you join us. We're also doing things about measuring within this maturity model and things around security within the platform space, and more technical things as well. We've had ideas around blog posts with implementations and sandboxes, but we need people to come in and join us with their energies and their ideas. And so come help us. Join this group. You can see this QR code. You can join our calls twice a month, and you can start to get involved in the conversation, whether or not you want to get involved in any of these larger pieces of work. I can tell you that the most learning I did is in the working group itself, more so than just reading the final output. But on that note, please do give the paper a read and provide any feedback that you might have, because we'll of course take that into account and aim to make this better with a version 2 when we've learned enough. Thank you so much, and I hope it was interesting to hear about the CNCF Platforms Working Group and the release of the platform's maturity model.